I'm Eddie Conway, coming to you from Baltimore. Welcome to the Real News. A few weeks ago, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner agreed to drop his challenge to the appeal in Mumia Abu-Jamal's case. Mumia is now open to argue his appeal case before Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We have Michael Schiffmann here today, who has followed Mumia's case for years, have written a book about Mumia and many articles, and he's going to discuss this new decision and what it bodes for the future. Michael, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Okay, how significant is this news that Krasner dropped the challenge to Mumia Abu-Jamal's getting a new trial?
Well, I think the significance is actually enormous. Apart from the hepatitis C case, which Mumia won in terms of his medical treatment, this is basically his first win since almost 20 years. And at least theoretically, it opens up the possibility of a new trial for him.
Okay. Do you think the attempt to stop his appeal, which was Krasner's first position, and to continue to lay his case was evidence of a cover-up?
Actually, no. Even though I was very upset and very disappointed about that decision, which came down in January 25th, I believe, I think the main concern of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office was that they would have to deal with hundreds, if not thousands, of cases where there was a similar conflict of interests between a judge at one time being a district attorney and at another time being on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, basically judging on his own dealings in the district attorney's office.
Okay. Krasner has been a progressive in other cases. Is this a sign that he's continuing in that direction?
I would very much hope so. But there are signs that the Mumia case continues to be a hot potato. So the district attorney's office made a statement, I think it was like 10 days or 2 weeks ago, and they said, we are retracting our appeal, but that doesn't mean that Mumia Abu-Jamal is going to get a new trial. Basically, his case is rewound to where it was in the mid-1990s, when the courts, the trial courts started to turn him down, and he turned to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court 4 times. Mm-hmm. And he's now having all those 4 appeals.
Okay, so in your opinion, based on your book and all your articles, do you think Mumia will be granted a new trial based on what you know about his case?
I think that depends on at least 2 parameters. When Mumia's appeals were routinely turned down by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the Supreme Court was basically stuffed by an old boys network, which were championed for during the elections by the FOP. The composition of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has now changed. There are more Democrats on the court. They are not as beholden to the FOP. But what that will mean for Mumia remains to be seen.
Okay. Go ahead.
The other theoretical option, and one would have to talk to Mumia's lawyers about that, would be, at least in my view, the district attorney's office would have the opportunity not to oppose the motions which are before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court now. So they could say, okay, we withdraw the opposition to one of those appeals, or we withdraw parts of it, which would also open the way to a new trial for Mumia.
Okay. Do you feel like the 6 boxes of evidence will play a part in the new trial? I mean, obviously they had made a decision that there wasn't nothing in there, but you think that might play a role now with this appeal?
Well, I regret having to say that I'm very skeptical about that, because if something new had been found in those 6 boxes, I'm pretty sure we would know it by now. In my view, in my assessment, they are evidence of what I have personally experienced, namely that the Mumia files, which have been accumulating for almost 4 decades, are in a terrible disarray. And my personal take is that probably the current district attorney's office, where many new people came in, does not know all that much about the case, and I hope they are still working on this and are working on this in depth, because if they discover the real truth about that case, they should really ponder the possibility of withdrawing their own appeals against what the defense is trying to do.
Well, have you heard what the activists on the ground has been doing around this new development? Is there any movement?
I think what they have done, particularly in Philadelphia and New York, is basically the right thing. Namely, they tried to lobby the district attorney's office in the name of justice not to oppose Mumia's appeals. And of course, theoretically, the courts are totally independent. But of course, there is also a court of public opinion. And that's actually where our strongest suit continues to be.
Okay, can you, and I know this is hard because when you talk about lawyers and appeals and all that, it's time, and it involves different times depending on how much they invest in it. What can we expect to happen next, and how long?
Well, the basic setup is this. Actually, at the moment, the case is not at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but at some superior court, which is in the middle. The best thing in terms of this case moving forward would be if the Superior Court handed the case to the Supreme Court immediately. That would fasten the process. And, you know, I mean, Mumia is no longer a young man. When I started to fight for him, I didn't have any gray hairs in my beard, and for him, it's much worse. And so in this case, I hate to quote Judge Sabo, who once said, justice delayed is justice denied. But that's actually the situation Mumia is in. He just turned 65.
Okay, so we don't know when there'll be movement at this point. What's the possibility of just, and I hear you say 65, have Mumia been interviewed by other television networks and stuff? I'm curious about whether or not we can actually interview him. Would you know that?
As far as I know, you can, but the situation was very clear when he was on death row, because any direct tapings, interviews, camera crews going in, setting up the Skype, were not allowed for death row inmates, for all death row inmates. Whether that's possible in Fragville, in the Mahoney prison where he's now in, that's something that you ought to try in any case. I mean, refusing the prisoners to have this possibility is actually a civil rights violation which should be challenged again and again.
Okay, thank you for joining me, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and thank you for joining The Real News.